Hey guys, this is Brandon from Walker's Woodworks again. I just recently did a custom mantle for one of my friends, and I kind of wanted to take you guys through the steps of how I did it. It's semi DIY. It's kind of a floating mantle, similar to a floating shelf, but just really big. It's almost 9 foot long. So if you guys want to stick around, I'll show you how I did it. Definitely be something you can do on your own. So I started out with 3 pieces of knotty alder. These are about 10 foot long, and here I'm just measuring out the front and the top. They wanted this to be a more rustic style mantle, and knotty alder is really good for that, and it's really nice to work with. Then I took my pieces over to the table saw and I ripped them down to width. My local lumber supply company actually services 3 sides, so you have a flat surface to reference on, so I don't really have to use my joiner most of the time, which is kind of nice. But your local supply store may only service 1 side or 2 side or no sides and just sell it as rough lumber, in which case you would need to go through the process of milling it down. Or you could just go to Home Depot and get stuff that's already surfaced on 4 sides if you want to use pine or something like that. Then I took it over to my miter saw and cut it all down to length. What I'm doing here is measuring out and marking the spots where I'm going to place the pocket holes that I'll use to attach the front to the top. Then I pulled out my Craig jig and started drilling pocket holes, making sure to put the mark on the line each time. It's a good idea to have something on each side of the jig to keep the board level. I use sanding sponges, they're about the same height. I actually glued this joint together and did not get it on video. But anyway, you want to use clamps anytime you're using pocket hole joinery, just so that when you start screwing the screw in, it doesn't pull the piece away from the other piece and keeps everything nice and lined up. Now this mantle actually wraps around a wall, so these 2 pieces I'm cutting here are the pieces for the top that go on the back side. If you were confused at all, now you can kind of see what I meant. So I just put a little bit of glue and wipe the excess on my workbench, because that's what I do, and then put it into place and put the screws in. Am I the only one that uses what's around for a hammer instead of an actual hammer? Yeah, like that. Probably not the best for a square. So here I'm just measuring for the side pieces and figuring out how big they need to be. I went ahead and cut enough for 2 pieces, both sides. That way I didn't need to use the longer piece and try to manage it and try to cut the smaller pieces off the end. So I used the fresh cut side to measure from, and that way it is nice and square. Then take it over to the Craig jig and drill the pocket holes to drill only into the front face. I should have mentioned before that I let the front hang over about 3/4 of an inch on each side. That way it will cover the end grain for the side pieces. This is how I attach it to the side from the top piece. I just take the actual Craig jig and clamp it to the top of the mantle, screw in from the inside out, and then you can put your screws in there and it'll hold it nice and tight. Then I just put a little bit of wood glue on each face that's going to be attached. I like to use Type Bond 3 for most of my projects. It works really well. Make sure to clamp it down, obviously, like I said. With pocket hole joinery, you definitely want to make sure everything's clamped and tight before you put the screws in, or else it will end up separating and be off of alignment just a little bit. I used the same process on the other end, and then I moved on to routing. The bit I'm using here is a 1/4 inch roundover, a monotool bit from Tools Today. I'll leave links to everything I'm using in this video in the description below as always, so you guys can just go down there and click it and it'll take you right to it. I did a roundover on all the showing faces, that way it kind of gave it a little bit of age look and it wasn't so blocky and sharp. Then I moved on to sanding. I silenced this part because the high-pitched sound of the sander going that fast was horrible. But I just used like 150 grit, went over the whole thing, sanding all the seams, making sure everything was flush. And then I moved on to hand sanding the roundovers, which I think is a lot easier than trying to use an orbital. You can really form your hand around the corners. Then it was time to move on to the mounting base, I guess you would call it. Basically what the mantle's going to sit on. I used 6/4 knotty alder, but you could just as easily use 2x4s or anything you had laying around. That would work just fine. I just brought it over the table saw and I'm cutting it down to width. This is actually the long piece, and then I'll move on to cutting the shorter pieces that will stick out and kind of give it some more support. I had a lot of these shorter scraps laying around, so I just ripped all those down to width. I measured those to length and cut them on my miter saw. Cut quite a few of these, so I won't make you watch the whole process. Laid them out on my piece and got them all evenly spaced, and then took them over to the jig and started drilling holes. As with the rest of this build, I used a glue clamp screw method. I lined it up with the end there, but then once I got in, I figured I needed to make sure it was square with the rest of the board, so I used a square and just made sure it was all nice and lined up. Here you can see kind of a slower close-up look of what I was doing. So these two pieces will be facing backwards, opposite of the others, because like I said, it wraps around. As you can see in the background there, that's kind of the shape it's trying to fit, just to give it some more support. And then it was time to set it in and see if it fit. And we're good. They wanted it to match their cabinets and some of the other trim in the house, so I went ahead and got the stain that they used for that and put that on the mantle. It's all personal preference. Some people like to use rags, but I like to use a foam brush to apply stain and then just go back over it with a rag afterwards and wipe off the excess. I didn't get any footage of the installation, but I'll leave you guys with a few beauty shots. As always, thanks for watching. If you guys like this video, please like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell to know when I put new videos out, and see you next time.